Dreaming of a better sleep? Tossing and turning is not your destiny. And Ollie is here to help. Ollie invites you to sink into sweet, sweet slumber to improve your mental and physical health and overall wellness. More than just melatonin, Ollie's ingredients help you unwind your mind for a delightfully dreamy drift off. Sleep is on the way at Ollie.com. That's OLLY.com.
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And on today's show, we'll be going over the Lexington Visitors Bureau, called VisitLex, hands out possibly unconstitutional bonuses, which calls into question the size of the salaries of those leading VisitLex, with the average executive over there making well over $250,000 a year. This is a taxpayer-funded organization within the city of Lexington, which leaves you asking questions about your own visitor bureaus in your own hometowns, and it should. Additionally, we have an interesting tax carve-out in the House Revenue Bill. House Bill 8 had an interesting tax revenue carve-out for a company that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We'll be going over that. And then finally, Beshear says that we're starving schools out by not giving them enough, but let's see what the truth is and see just how we fix our education system. What is enough money? Are we giving them enough? We'll be digging into that. All that today here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before we dig down into it, please make sure head on over to theandrewshow.com, where you can check out old shows. You can also leave comments for the show. You can use the contact tab there to go ahead and leave a message for me. You can also email info@theandrewshow.com. Actually, the Visitor Bureau question, VisitLex, that's a story coming from the Lexington Times, but was originally sent to me through the contact form. Somebody sent me a message, said, hey, here's an interesting story you might want to take a look at. So as you see interesting stories that you think would be of interest to the show, to the listeners, something that you want to draw my attention to, feel free to send it over to me. It's at theandrewshow.com. Now, obviously, we've had some storms rolling through Kentucky over the past few days, some tornadoes touching down in different parts, and I hope everybody listening is okay. I know several of the listening area for WZXI, as well as, of course, the podcast version goes out all across the state. I know that homes were affected, and I hope that everybody in your family is safe and okay, and you're able to rebuild. But I think this gives us a time where we can look at why having this budget reserve trust fund, this savings account, is so important, and why spending it like we have a money burning in our pocket is quite the problem. Because the last few days I've gone over some of the spending going on out of the budgetary trust fund, that savings account, in House Bill 1, and some questions about why we're spending money where we are. And those questions are good to ask because obviously those are your dollars, but also it's important that we understand what this money is for. And it's for situations just like these, where we've had a natural disaster, where we've seen government infrastructure damaged, where we've seen people's homes and roads and all kinds of things damaged and needing quick and speedy repairs, and having that savings account set aside to take care of those natural disasters, I think, is incredibly important. And that's why I take it as so much offense when we misspend the money out of those savings accounts. We've seen Beshear, we see other Democrats online when we talk about how this spending is bad and how it's a problem. Their response is, well, what would you spend it on? And I always say the same thing. I say, look, either you don't spend it and you save it, you can pay off debt, or you can give it back to the taxpayer. But if the Democrats had it their way, and the way Beshear talks about it, and you look at the budgets he puts out, he would spend every last dime that's in the savings account. And that just gives you the perfect example of why we need to save it. Because when we have these storms and natural disasters, having the resources to be able to come in and take care of things quickly is very important. Also, speaking of House Bill 1, yesterday, I was talking about the Louisville Orchestra and how House Bill 1 was giving $4.3 million to the Louisville Orchestra, which is in perfectly good and reasonable financial position, is sitting on, about $6 million in the bank, is making last fiduciary year that they have published, the 2022 fiscal year ending in 2022. They had, let's see here, right around or 2-3 million in positive revenues in the black there. And so we gave them 4.3 million, which doesn't make a lot of sense. They've got money in the bank. They got money coming in. And we went over some of the programming too. It was funding like the rap school. One of the things that was brought to my attention of how this funding gets in there, because people do wonder, they're like, how does this work in there? Who throws it in there? And how does it stay? Why don't people heavily look into it? And something that was sent to me, drawing my attention to, was something that happened on October in 2023. In October 2023, the Louisville, the Kentucky Center for Performing Arts, which is where the Louisville Orchestra operates out of, and they have their rap school out of too as well, they invited the legislators in Frankfort to a legislative reception and performance. Apparently, the show Wicked was being put on up there, and so they invited them to a 2 p.m. performance of Wicked on Saturday with a brunch reception at noon. Now, because they sent these tickets to every single legislator, it doesn't count as a gift, so it's okay for legislators to take this. And, many legislators did take them up on the offer and go see Wicked and get a free meal. But those simple acts is how they leverage getting more of your taxpayer dollars. It's that type of lobbying, giving them treats and perks, because a lot of these representatives, a lot of these senators, they're perks people. They're all about what they can get for free. They're all about the honorifics too as well. So many people wonder why is it that things get pulled over on legislators, or why is it that legislators vote for these things? Because most of them are just there to have a good time. They've always wanted to be a legislator, or they kind of had some idea they wanted to accomplish something. Then once they got in, man, they got clapped for, they get called out, they get acknowledged everywhere they go, they get free meals, receptions, show tickets. They're treated special. They're treated with honorifics. And they get addicted to being in office because they just want to feel special. That is what they're most worried about losing, being in office. They're not worried about accomplishing things. Now, they'll lie to themselves, of course, and they'll say that they're the best option for that seat in the world. And if they weren't in there, all kinds of crazy things would be happening. And so they tell themselves a lie. And that lie sounds like this: well, if I'm not in office, I can't help anybody. What they really mean is, if I'm not in office, I can't feel special. I can't help myself, which is why things like a Broadway show and golf and all these a little brunch, a little catered meal meeting, it's why during session, every single meal for the legislators is basically catered. They can get a catered meal, like even Saturday and Sundays. There's somebody putting on something, and that would easily buy them a meal to do, because those little things is actually how you get their ear. It's how you get these legislators to listen to you and not to their constituents, and not to do basic things. As I was talking about the Louisville Orchestra, checking out their financial position literally took me 2 minutes. It did not take me any length of time at all. And if anybody who's actually fiscally conservative took those 2 minutes to say, hey, before we give millions of dollars to this person, let's look where they are financially, would have came up with the same conclusion. They would see millions of dollars of positive income, millions of dollars in the bank, and said, I'm not going to give $4.3 million to this organization. But they didn't bother to research because they didn't want to. They got too much going on. They're too busy. They can't take the time to look at how millions of your dollars are being spent. Instead, they're worried about, well, they did give me tickets to go see Wicked and a brunch, so I guess that's worth me looking the other way, or not looking too deeply when $4.3 million is slipped in on a $2.7 billion spending package. Well, coming up after this, we'll be digging into possible unconstitutional actions by the Lexington Visitors Bureau called VisitLex. After this short break, you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. So VisitLex. And for those of you who don't live in Lexington, you're going to want to pay attention to this story anyways, because chances are in your city, you have a visitors bureau as well, and you're going to be left asking a lot of the same questions that I was left asking following me checking out this story. Now, for full disclosure, all this information, generally speaking, that I'm going to be talking about, I got from a Lexington Times article that was sent to me by a listener using the contact tab on the andrewshow.com website. You just go on there, hit contact, and you can reach out to me. And so that's where most of my source is going to come from. Now, this isn't the first time I've covered VisitLex wasting some money before on the show. In fact, a little while ago, I played for you one of their fantastic ideas, something they expended apparently a lot of taxpayer funds on, at least a few thousand it would appear. And that was sending a tourism message to an interesting audience. Let's take a listen to this news report. Like I said, I'd covered this on the show at the time, but just to remind you of the kind of important work this place is doing.
This is the first time that we as a species have ever sent out a travel ad inviting aliens to come visit.
Lexington, Kentucky just beamed the world's first interstellar travel ad into outer space. With the help of local scientists and scholars, VisitLex created an advertising campaign designed to invite extraterrestrials to visit Lexington. Using a modified laser, the message was aimed at the TRAPPIST-1 star system, 40 light-years away.
We're targeting the TRAPPIST-1 system because we might actually get an answer in somebody's lifetime if there's somebody there watching. But the reason scientists have been interested in it lately is because of the large number of planets that it has and what it's considered to be the habitable zone. So there could be life there. Why not send a signal and see if they answer?
The message contains a bitmap key with prime numbers, the elements of life, molecules for water, ethanol, and dopamine, plus horses and Lexington's iconic bluegrass landscape. The message also contained a collection of images representing Lexington, a selfie from the transmission event, and an audio recording from local blues legend T.D. Young.
Of all of the things that we've been beaming into space, why not a positive, friendly message? I think saying, hey, we're nice and friendly people, we have horses and bourbon and dopamine, don't eat us.
We have this neat hub of creativity. It's just people who get to have the freedom to think a little bit differently. It does seem as if it's this place that is very welcoming.
Here's our chance to really demonstrate that we are a beautiful culture, a beautiful community, and that we want to share that with the galaxy, that we're the best place on earth.
The message was sent with FAA approval from the Kentucky Horse Park. So far, no unusual activity has been reported in the skies above Lexington, but we'll be waiting.
Now, you may remember me saying at the time that they're playing it real fast and loose, first assuming that the aliens a message would come to Lexington to visit, not to take it over, and that they would bring a currency that we would find valuable. Of course, that's the other issue. But putting all that joking to the side, this is clearly a stunt, I guess, to try to put Lexington on the map. But outside of a few people making fun of it, how many people have visited Lexington saying, you know what, I wasn't going to visit Lexington, but then I saw that they were messaging aliens, so I decided to go ahead and come. I don't think it's a whole lot. Now, of course, the reason why we're revisiting this, as I said at the top, was, well, recently we've seen VisitLex handing out possibly unconstitutional bonuses. They gave out over $284,000 to 14 employees, including $56,000 being given to the president of VisitLex, Mary Quinn Raymer. Now, not only is this a constitutional issue, because it would seem based upon Section 3 of the Kentucky State Constitution, as well as some statutes that go along with this, it prohibits paying government employees more compensation than what is stipulated by statute. And so there's nowhere in statute where it's stipulated to be able to pay bonuses to the VisitLex staff. Therefore, it would seem that these bonuses could be illegal and unconstitutional. But even outside of the bonuses being handed out, which we'll kind of revisit in a second, this does actually raise some other questions, because the fact the bonuses were handed out drew people to start to look at, Lexington Times to start to look at what these people are being paid. And they discovered some ridiculous compensation packages for many of the people over there at VisitLex. In fact, the 4 executives that head up VisitLex, their average salary is $282,000 a year. $282,000 a year. Well, more than $1 million a year just spent on the leadership of VisitLex. You may say, well, Andrew, that's probably just fair market value, but you're wrong. VisitLex's budget is $14 million, and it's set by ordinance. It doesn't exceed $14 million. There's no way for them to make more money, because the way they're funded, they get funding from a hotel tax. We'll go into that here in a bit, but they get funding from this hotel tax. But it's not like if they get more hotel tax in, so if they do a good job and bring in more people, that brings them more revenues, they still have the same amount of revenue of $14 million. They have the same amount of money. So one, it's not like you have a profit to pay bonuses on in the first place, but even there, just comparing them to other government employees, if you don't understand how absurd it is that they're overseeing a $14 million budget, they have 17 employees, and the average executive there is making over $250,000 a year, that is more money than the mayor of the city. That is more money than the commissioner, who's overseeing a $480 million budget and thousands of employees and deputies. And this also leads to, of course, a more obvious and other question. What does VisitLex or any of these tourism bureaus in your towns and cities actually do? And how are they helpful to the governments and the towns they represent? As in, what do they do to deserve bringing in $14 million? And if they do those actions, how could they possibly be deserving of bonuses? How would success be measured? As I said, VisitLex is funded through a hotel tax that was recently raised 2.5% more than it was before, raised another 2.5%. So it was increased. But that also funds the Lexington Convention Center, among other things. So perhaps you could say, well, a marker of success would be the amount of hotel stays, because that raises, of course, the money coming into them anyways. But with inflation and COVID being, coming into play, you would ask how much of that visit is due to VisitLex's. Now, you could certainly say a lot of people visiting could be due to the convention center, putting on things like concerts and, conventions and meetings and, those types of activities. That certainly brings people into town. Events and attractions do that. But that's not VisitLex. That's not them who's marketing it. When there's a convention at the convention center, the people putting on the convention are the ones marketing it. So you have millions being sucked out of the tourism industry to fund VisitLex. And in your own towns, you have money being sucked out to fund your tourism bureaus. And the question is, could that be better spent by the tourism industry itself? And also, wouldn't it be better if you did have this, that it was voluntarily funded, so that way you don't get situations where you've got, thousands of dollars of undeserved bonuses being handed out? And wouldn't it create a more responsive group that can show success? What I mean by that is, where private companies basically choose to be involved with the tourism bureau, and they voluntarily pay to be included into the guides, their coupon books, their ads, their publications. That drives business to them. And then the services are being paid for by the people who financially benefit from that. It's not a redistribution of taxpayer funds that ultimately ends up funding the marketing process that benefits certain businesses while not benefiting others, even though it's all taxpayer funded. If it was instead voluntary, and the people who are benefiting are the ones paying in, well, that would create a bureau that I believe, would do more, not just send messages to aliens. And don't get me wrong, I know they occasionally run ads, in other states, and they do marketing campaigns for Lexington. And as your tourism bureaus, if you don't live in Lexington, they probably do marketing campaigns for your areas. They go to conventions, they go to visiting groups, they go to the state fair. We'll have all these visitor bureaus there. But I ask you, what drives you to visit an area? For all of you who've ever traveled, what drives you to visit the area? It's not an ad saying, hey, come visit us. It's not even ads. Really, it's events or attractions, specific attractions. It's not marketing campaigns per se. Maybe marketing campaigns that let you know about a specific attraction, but then wouldn't the people who make money off that attraction be the one to market it? Or people who are making money off the events be the one to market it? That want to drive people here? I've never once seen one of these ads on TV and thought, I'm going to try. You know what? I've never been to Utah. I have, but I've never been to Utah. I want to travel there. I've never seen one of those ads and thought that. It's like one of those things, and it's an intangible. How do you measure this? How do you measure that tangibility? It's not like people are coming into Lexington and there's somebody at the checkpoint asking, hey, why are you here? You're visiting? Oh, who told you about us? Oh, this ad is what brought you here? Oh, that's great. Maybe they could say, we've had a certain amount of requests for pamphlets from people, but that's just people looking for other things to do maybe in the area, not the Visitor Bureau themselves bringing them in. And that states once again, why can't the businesses that would benefit from being involved in those pamphlets be the ones to fund it? Wouldn't leaving the $14 million in the community to invest in their own marketing make more sense with that in mind? Not to mention the way government is set up on the local level anyways, it's hard to wonder why your local governments care as much about tourism in the first place. But to go over that, we'll have to wait till after this break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. For the break, we were talking about a story coming from the Lexington Times regarding the VisitLex, the City of Lexington Visitors Bureau, where executives there are being paid, 4 executives there overseeing 17 employees and a $14 million budget, are being paid on average $282,000 a year. And the employees over there just got paid out $284,000 in bonuses, a move that could be potentially unconstitutional. And we were going through, what does VisitLex do? How do they operate? And it leads to the question of, why is government involved in this tourism bureau in the first place? How does this pay off for the local governments? And I think that's an important question to wonder, because they're putting in place this tax. They put a tax on hotels in Lexington to fund this. I don't know how they do it in all the communities, if they do something similar, but in every community, just about, there is a tourism bureau, and that tourism bureau is funded in part through taxpayer dollars. And so the question becomes, what are they doing with that money, and why isn't it coming from, the private businesses that benefit from those tourism dollars? And you say, well, the local government, though, they bring in tax revenues off this tourism. And so they benefit. So it's worthwhile to them to somehow tax private companies to then fund a campaign that benefits private companies, so then they can make money off private companies. It seems like circular logic. But anyways, you'd say, no, it's an investment, Andrew. But when it comes to tourism, it's really not a good investment in the first place. Why? Because look at how we tax. And this is important to understand. Anytime we're talking about policies and procedures being put in place by the government, and they claim it's investment, and I called this out yesterday. I hate it when government calls things an investment, because they're not a person. They don't get a payoff. They're not investing their own money. Investment involves risk, and the government shouldn't be doing risky things with our money to begin with that they're hoping pays off in the end. That isn't what government should be doing. They should be risking their own money, not our money. But putting that to the side, even if you believe that government should be doing these kinds of investments, you have to understand how these locales make their tax dollars. They make tax dollars from an occupational tax, from property tax. They can put in place something like a hotel tax like they did here, but occupational tax, a property tax, insurance tax, and that's pretty much it. And the occupational tax is like an income tax. So in order to pull in the occupational tax, they need people to work in the area. And they use that money then to fund their essential services. So when you have tourism, though, when you have retail, when you have restaurants, when you have these things that are bringing people into your area, you have these people traveling to your area, putting a stress on your local utilities, while at the same time, the tourism industry jobs, the hotels, the restaurants, the retails, they're actually not revenue to job creation, the best jobs out there for an quote unquote income tax that these local governments can charge. Manufacturing is a much better option for them. In that case, they make a lot more money off of the resources they have to spend and put out. Because keep in mind, tourism brings in people that you're not making any money off of. Now, the state makes money off of them, off the sales tax, but the local industry, they're not making, the cities are not making money per se off of these people coming into the area, other than the potential tourism jobs that it creates, and then they get paid tax dollars from. That's it. That's the only way they make that money. And so if you had to choose between 50 tourism jobs or 50 manufacturing jobs, you'd choose 50 manufacturing jobs. Because with those 50 manufacturing jobs, you're only bringing in 50 people into your area that maybe already live there to provide services for. But with 50 tourism jobs, not only one is the pay generally lower, so you pull in less money off of them, but two, you're probably bringing in thousands of people into the area that now you have to worry about providing essential services for, that you're not making any extra revenues off of like you would if you're bringing in people to work in the area. And so that also doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I just think overall, taking a look at this absolutely ridiculous pay. I mean, these people getting paid more to run 17 employees, $14 million organization than the mayor and the city commissioner running $480 million taxpayer-funded organizations. Not only is that ridiculous, but we should really start asking questions about what is it that these visiting bureaus do outside of course, send messages to aliens. What is their tangibles? Can they show where they've had a return on investment? Or is this just something that we spend money on and is just waste by the government? I'm not saying it necessarily is, but is it just waste by the government that actually doesn't benefit anybody in the area at all? And it'd be better if just private industry took this over. Certainly something to talk about. Speaking of, tax handouts, tax waste, here's an interesting point from House Bill 8. That's the revenue bill. And that bill deals with, of course, our taxing, how we pull in the revenue to the state. Hence why it's called the revenue bill. And it outlines all the different sales taxes and everything else. Well, there's an interesting tax carve out here. And it's a sales and use tax exemption for up to 50 years for a data center if they invest more than $450 million. So basically, if you're in a technology center and you come into Kentucky and you spend at least $450 million, you can potentially be exempt from sales and use tax for up to 50 years. So that means every single thing you buy, you'd be sales tax exempt from paying on. And you can take that money and turn it in for a tax incentive. So basically, you wouldn't have to pay any sales tax. I'm left wondering, why are we doing this and why are we going after these companies? Going once again back to how government makes money. I mean, just from a sheer practical standpoint, even if you are someone who really likes government economic development and government carve-outs for corporations, you say, look, it can be ugly, but that's just the way it works sometimes. How does this make any sense at all for our state government side of things? First, we're moving away from an income tax and a corporate income tax too as well. We're trying to move away from an income tax and move only to a sales tax or a consumption tax to be our main source, not only, but a consumption tax, a sales tax to be our main source of revenue for the state. That's our long-term goal. And you're over here giving this company a 50-year sales tax exemption. I mean, in the long run, yeah, you maybe can pull some revenues off of them now, but in the long run, if you make the transition that you're aiming to do, this isn't going to be a company you bring in and it brings you like a lot of more revenue into the state in the long term. Now, sometimes they'll say, well, locally, it helps the local governments out. It brings in jobs. It helps them with their occupational tax that I talked about before. And because it helps them with that, it helps the state not have to redistribute funds. And that is something these economic development from the state level will talk about, why it's a quote unquote investment. So keep that in mind. The requirement for this company is it has to have at least 500,000 people in the county it sets up in. So that means like only Louisville qualifies. And if Louisville can't make their ends meet now, they're literally never going to from the state level, worrying about redistributing funds and everything to Louisville. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But data centers are not like labor heavy, and they allow for remote work. So if you give a 50-year sales tax exemptions, what are you giving it away for? You're not getting a whole lot of occupational tax a lot of times because they are remote workers. What is it, a potential property tax bill? Is that what you're going after here? It's a very confusing move. Until we see the actual company they're thinking of doing this for, we won't know. But just kind of crazy. And like, as I'm bringing this up, once again, there's several legislators that have no clue what I'm talking about here. They listen to this and they're like, what do you mean we gave a 50-year sales tax exemption to data center that as long as they spend at least $450 million building a data center in Kentucky? I had no idea. What company is this for? Because obviously it's being carved out for a specific company. Once it's announced, we'll see. But I tell you this much. They may say it may create a bunch of jobs, but if they're remote jobs, and if they aren't in Louisville, if they're not in Kentucky especially, it's not helping Kentucky out at all. And it leaves a lot of questions. And also, it leads you to this taxing policy. If your taxing is so rough, if your sales tax policy is so rough that if you have to give a 50-year exemption in order to attract in a company, you got to think about how it's affecting all the little companies out there too. Because the people who can least afford to pay an overburdensome taxing structure is the small businesses. A big business that has $450 million to spend on data center, a sales tax ain't going to shut them down. Well, coming up after this, we'll be digging a little bit into education talk. We'll have that. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you in a few short minutes. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. So obviously with the school choice amendment passing here in Kentucky, we're going to see the Democrats spin up a full court press against school choice, and they're going to be pumping out all kinds of talking points. Not really as much data or information you'll notice. They will have slogans like, public dollars should go to public schools, which obviously ignores just about every single other way government operates because public dollars go to private companies to do public works all the time. Like, basically our government is just a general contractor to begin with. But anyways, putting that to the side. Or they'll say things like fun schools, fun. You can't starve out public schools. That's a common one we're hearing now. We actually, Beshear and others, the Democrat Party of Kentucky, regularly tweeting this out. In fact, here's a video of Beshear saying recently that we can't starve our education system, and if we want to fix it, we got to give it more money. That's why it's failing. I'm not kidding. Here you go. Here is his point.
Now, the way to fix public education is to fix public education, is to ensure we're providing the funding that it needs. And if you look at these budgets, they're not making the increases in public education that are necessary to make those fixes. So you can't underfund and starve a system and then say it doesn't work and send the money somewhere else. I think Kentuckians will overwhelmingly vote against public dollars going to private schools. Private schools are fine, but they are a choice. At the end of the day, these are private corporations that really want to get their hands on a lot of money that should be going to public schools. Now,
So if you hear it that way from Beshear, you would assume that we're just absolutely 100%. We are just starving out our public schools. They are not getting nearly enough money. Well, some new data has come to light, and it looks like Jefferson County Public Schools is spending over $23,000 a student. $23,000 a student. And according to the most recent school rankings, Jefferson County Public Schools, that's Louisville, enjoys having the 10 worst performing schools in the state are all a part of the Jefferson County Public School system. And they're spending $23,000 $23,000 a student. $23,000. I mean, if you're literally talking about a classroom size of 15 kids, that is $350,000 a year you're spending to educate those kids. 15 kids, $350K a year. And if you can't educate 15 kids for $350K a year, there's no amount of money you're ever going to have. It's never going to be enough money for you to teach these kids to read and write because there's something fundamentally flawed about the system. You can say it could be the parents are a chunk of it. The school isn't focusing on the right things. They're worried about your feelings and your emotions and all kinds of other things instead of worrying about teaching you to read, write, and do math. It could be because there's language barriers. It could be any number of issues, and each of those are clearly not being addressed by our current system. They're not being addressed by it. You know, one of the things people don't mention as much about school choice systems, but when you have a mass school choice system, the key thing it does is that it engages parents and it sends a clear message. Because right now, the message being sent by mostly Democrats, but our governments in general, is give us your kids, we'll raise them. Even Republicans are saying this. You may remember from this session, earlier on, people like Senator Danny Carroll and others talking about how we need to get a hold of kids at birth. Kelly and Timothy talking about we need to start educating kids at birth with government-sponsored educational systems from birth. Because they believe it is the government's job to raise your kid. And that is what government's telling people. It's government's job to raise your kid. It's government's job to feed your kids. If you try to do anything at all on food stamps, if you try to do anything at all on, school lunches, which is just out of control, the people who are getting these school lunches, you could pull up, there's many people whose kids' breakfast and lunch are being paid for, and they're just pulling up in Porsches, and their kids are getting free lunches, right? And so it's like, it's out of control. But if you talk about any kind of change or any kind of reforming, any kind of thing that emphasizes that it's a parent's job to raise their child, even with the basic necessities, that's on the parents. Even something as simple as saying, if you're on food stamps and your kid is getting free and reduced lunch at school, you get a deduction in your food stamps because obviously you get the same amount of food stamps during the summer because your kid you're supposed to provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner for. But if your kid's on free and reduced lunch, well, during the school year, you don't have to provide them breakfast or lunch because they're both provided by the school 5 days a week. And so you should see a reduction in your food stamps then in that case. Like, you just suggest anything like that, they'll say, what's your problem? You don't want kids to eat? It's not that we don't want kids to eat. It's that what we're saying is that it's a parent's role and job to raise their children, period. And the message we're sending them is you're not to raise your kids. Heck, we're going to hide things about your kids from you. That, we need to indoctrinate your kids with our ideologies. In fact, your ideologies are awful and horrible and mean to the point where we don't even trust you around your children. We'll keep things from you if our kid asks us to. That's a real policies that Kentucky Department of Education put out. You politicians, like I said, saying we need to start at birth. You have Beshear out there saying that the fact that kids can't read or write is because they're not getting enough money from the government. It gives the ability for all these people to turn and say, government, you're failing to do your job of raising my kid because government can't do what they're supposed to do, which is say, look, we're here to teach your kid to read, write, and do math alongside you. But you're the parent and you're in control. And that's what school choice sends the message of. School choice sends the message that it is your job to be in charge of your child's education. That's why study after study shows that in school choice systems, even when parents pick public schools, traditional public schools, they're more satisfied with the same school because they had a choice. But it also, once again, makes them feel empowered, and it leads to parents being more involved in the child's education and more clear that you're in control of it. You're in charge of your child. It's your kid. Take care of them. Stop asking everybody else to raise your kid for you. But that's not a conversation the Democrats want to have because they do want to raise your kids. See, that's why they hate school choice so much. It involves parents. It was able to sneak in these liberal states, California, New York. They were able to kind of get it in there because they were quite frankly like, maybe it's a little bit more responsive and faster than having to build public schools and deal with that problem. I bet you they wish they didn't. I bet you they wish they left government in charge of that education completely and fully at the beginning. And what's most important too is that when we look at these educational problems, conservatives like me, we offer up some solutions. We offer up some solutions. Solutions like, hey, stop spending so much money on the administrative body. Stop worrying so much about kids' feelings. Focus more on teaching them about reading and math. We offer solutions like put parents in control of their child's education so they feel more involved, and so parents can come alongside the kids and feel like they have a place in a child's education. So that way they sit down and do the homework with the kids at night. We offer those solutions. But the liberal on the other hand, Democrat, all they yell about is we need more money. But what's funny is they never give you that dollar amount, do they? In Beshear's speech I played for you, he says, we're starving out the schools. We got to give them more money. But he never once says the exact amount he needs in order to start at least teaching half these kids how to read, write, do math. Because in the Jefferson County public school system, less than half the kids are proficient in reading, math, writing. But they don't have a number because they're worried. If they actually give us a number, we might give it to them. And then we'll ask why they continue to fail, because they can't admit the problems are not able to be fixed by our current public school system, because that would mean we need a new system. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank y'all so much for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.